and saw a kid skipping down the hall. I called out to him as I was afraid a little kid had snuck out of a patient room. As soon as I called out to him, he turned and in the blink of an eye totally vanished. A lot of other nurses and docs had seen the same little kid skipping in that same hallway. Of course I chalked it up to just exhaustion and didn't really think about it much after that. But you are damn sure I didn't use that hallway at night ever again. Did a rotation in the burn unit. There are tons of stories that go around, but I'll share my favorite. A pimp lit one of his prostitutes on fire, and she immediately bear hugged him, causing them to both suffer pretty severe injuries. Unfortunately, hers included an inhalation burn. They both were being treated in the same ICU but on opposite ends. Weeks later she ends up coding and passes away, and after about 30 minutes, as things start to quiet down, the guy starts screaming from his room, "Get her out. Get the goddamn bitch out of my room." What are some horrifying things to consider when thinking about aliens? Aliens could do to us what we did to wolves, selectively breeding a once noble species in grotesque ways, transforming us into the equivalent of bulldogs, poodles, dachshunds, etc. The possibility of them already knowing about us but us not knowing about them. We have no idea if they know. They could be committing space espionage right now and we wouldn't know about it. This reminds me of the dark forest theory. Like hunters in a dark forest, a civilization can never be certain of an alien civilization's true intentions. In summary, all life desires to stay alive. There is no way to know if other life forms can or will destroy you if given a chance. Lacking assurances, the safest option for any species is to annihilate other life forms before they have a chance to do the same. For all we know, aliens might not be the little green men that fly around in flying saucers and destroy us with laser beams. They could be an interstellar pathogen that shows up one day and silently and effortlessly kills us all without warning. Our immune systems would have no idea what hit them. That they don't actually exist. If there were no advanced civilization that can colonize other planets, that would mean that most of them go extinct before they reach that level of technological advancement, which means that we are probably doomed to extinction too. That they are from the future. Time flows differently in space, and if aliens are real, then they could be from the future. What if the aliens are humans from the future but they've evolved so much we can't recognize them as human? Travelers of lonely roads, explorers of the great outdoors, workers of creepy jobs and late-night shifts. What's your scary story? I was driving down an old highway, not heavy usage anymore, during a snowstorm in 2011. Had a pretty close call on this particular trip. I was heading to the next town over with my girlfriend at the time, and we were behind an SUV on the road. We were behind them for a good while, when they came to a stop. I maneuvered the car around to get a good look at why they stopped. There was a truck in the road, driver and passenger doors open, and two sets of tracks in the snow leading off to the woods. I got out of the car to make sure no one was injured or needed help, but there were no signs of car trouble. There wasn't much snow built up on the inside of the car, so the doors hadn't been left open for long. It was snowing pretty heavily. I started to follow the set of tracks into the woods to check, but stopped. Before I could do much of anything else, the driver of the SUV called me over and let me know that the truck had been reported as stolen. They said highway patrol was on their way, so I went about my business. A day or so later I found out the owner of the truck was a man who lived nearby that had been missing for over a week. The police went into the woods to look for him, and found his freshly deceased body in a ditch with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Whoever took him beforehand must have marched him out there, executed him, and just wandered off into the woods. I'm still very glad I didn't follow those tracks. I didn't hear the shot, so it must have been right before we all arrived at the truck. I don't even want to think what would have happened to me if I'd persisted. I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood, a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyway, it was a nice night. Uneventful trip. But when I got home, my roommate was coming out the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going into work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did in that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5-something in the AM. My roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit, then called the friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't tired, no one could have slipped anything in either of the 2 Coors Lights I'd had, no known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened to that time. Reddit, what was the scariest place you have ever been to? Reconstructed subway which exploded years ago in Daegu, Korea. They memorialized the explosion on site, scorched walls, melted people's items, burnt phone booths and all, but the scariest was the scorched walls with writings and handprints of the people that were trapped during the explosion. This subway is one of the busiest stations even today due to being the city's downtown area. Last text messages from the victims of the Daegu subway fire on February 18, 2003. The street at Bolton Abbey. It's not too far from where I used to live, so I decided to go there once. It's the most unassuming thing you can imagine, but knowing how dangerous it is just makes it seem ominous, especially when you consider how many people it may have killed and how few people ever wash up. I didn't go within 10 feet of the thing. For anyone who doesn't want to click the link, the street is what happens when a fast-flowing river basically turns on its side, putting a vast amount of water through a very slim, very deep, very dark groove in the ground. It looks calm on the surface, but if you fall in, you are royally fucked. There's a claim that it might be the most dangerous stretch of water in the world, and I can readily believe it. Probably a cave, wriggling through a lemon drop as they called it, where you go feet first down a skinny-ass tunnel and have to wriggle down about 12 feet before you drop into a chamber below. About halfway my shoulders got stuck and it took like 5 excruciating minutes to get loose. I don't know why I went spelunking, I'm claustrophobic. People of Reddit, what was the creepiest thing you experienced that you thought was paranormal, but was actually much scarier when you found out what really caused it? When I was 8 we were on a long holiday, staying with some family in a town called Surat. It's in country Queensland, Australia. I was staying in their son's room who had moved to Brisbane for university. Each night I had the same recurring nightmare of an alien tentacle trying to grab me. After a week I was terrified of going to sleep, but my parents kept telling me that it was okay. I was just frightened because we were staying somewhere new and that it would be okay. Well, I couldn't get to sleep. I kept watching the clock, waiting for the sun to come up and terrified of the alien. It was just after 2 a.m. when a large tentacle landed on the bed. I screamed in terror as I felt the tentacle wriggling. I jumped out of bed and kept screaming. My parents, aunt, uncle, and sister run into the room to find me huddled in the corner screaming. Turns out it was an adult carpet python over 2 meters long. Each night it worked its way under a ceiling tile, and onto the bed. I still have an Indiana Jones fear of snakes. Why'd it have to be snakes? As a young kid, I had nightmares of waking up to see my mother hovering over my bed by the window. She just blankly stared down at me and my sister. I'd get so scared yelling "Mom! Mom!" and she never responded. It knew it was not my mom. When I was older I told my aunt about it and she told me they weren't dreams. It was real. My mom would go into our rooms randomly to check on us. She had serious mental health issues that got worse over the years. Occasionally she would have episodes of anxiety of something happening to us and guard us at night. Due to the traumatic death of her first child, it apparently triggered obsessive anxiety when we were younger. I now know the whole fucked up backstory and can sympathize with why it would make any parent get to that mental state, but I still shudder when I think of the blank-faced stare. I still tend to associate the nightmare mom as not being my mom. I heard loud banging in the attic. Every morning I went up there, I couldn't find anything, so I thought it was ghosts. After a week of this I decided to hide in the attic and keep watch, and I saw my grandpa going ham on my grandma. I was very much traumatized and was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Thanks for watching. Click on the next video to listen to the continuation. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new stories.